Baby, if you haven't seen Netflix's The Deliverance by Lee Daniels, then you're missing out. Because Glenn Close gives one hell of a performance in this movie. Now, this 2018 interview talks about how art imitates life. Yeah, Glenn Close was part, or at least her family was part of a cult-like religious group. And now I see why she was able to relate to that character so effortlessly and brilliantly on the screen. Let's watch.
Contributed to a book by your sister Jessie called Resilience. It was about her upbringing. For all of you and your siblings, it was complicated, a very fractured family. She was undiagnosed as bipolar until the age of 50. And you wrote passages in the book with your perspective of what was happening to her and your family. I bring it up because it is such a valuable book for anybody who may be suffering or think they're suffering or has a loved one who's suffering. Mm-hmm. It's a really beautifully written book.
And so honest.
So honest.
She does not let herself, that moved me, the courage to be so brutally honest.
It's a beautiful story. People know the story, but your family was in a religious organization. Many people would call it a cult called the Moral Rearmament. And your parents at a delicate time in their own lives joined it and were taken away from the kids, and the kids kind of were scattered to the wind. And there was a lot of suffering that went on because of it, which she writes so beautifully about in the book, and so do you. But the end of that story is that there was a tremendous amount of forgiveness. It seems that you, at the end, had forgiven your parents.
Each of us had to go through that process of forgiveness. It wasn't easy for my parents to talk about, certainly my father. But I guess I've made my career figuring out the whys of behavior, and I did the same thing with my parents. And I've learned more and more about them and more about what their situation was and how vulnerable they were at certain times. So I think I really understand why they were so vulnerable to a group like that, not knowing the devastation that it would cause their children. But my dad was 7 when he was sent away to boarding school. And it was traumatic for him, but, he visited the same thing upon his kids. There came a point where I got very, very angry at my father, and I wrote him this letter where I was absolutely honest. I said, you don't deserve to be called our father. I mean, it was so harsh. In fact, I read it to my mother and I read it to my siblings. I said, I'm just going to send this to Dad. Because he was a narcissist. And he was brilliant. But he definitely had a dollop of narcissism. And I think, women, and I could do it. I did it with him, and I think my mom did it. You say, oh, but we know that underneath there's this fragility, and he really is, wanting to be loved because he was abandoned, and, you have to prove that you're worth loving, and so you're this. And I think that goes to a certain point, but you have to make sure that it doesn't go to the point where you're an enabler. And I think in many ways my mom enabled him. She never developed her where she was brilliant, and to the point where she said to me near the end of her life, I feel like I haven't achieved anything. And I think there are a lot of women who go through that.